Welcome to the 2025 Technophilosophy September Soiree. My name is Karina Vold, and I'm an assistant professor at the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology here at the University of Toronto. I'm also a research lead at the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for Technology and Society in this beautiful building. So first of all, I really want to thank you all for joining us on such a beautiful evening. I know it's tempting to be outdoors, so I appreciate your enthusiasm for coming in for this event and for this conversation. And I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. So I hope that it's worth your dedication here. And obviously the topic we're going to be thinking about today is about AI companionship, or our relationship with AI tools. And I think with the increasing presence of these tools online and accessibility of them, this is becoming all the more relevant for everybody. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a minute, but first let me start by acknowledging the incredible group of people and organizations that it took to put this event together. First, my thanks to the staff and leadership at the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for supporting this event for the last few years, alongside our friends and partners at the University of Toronto Centre for Ethics, at Victoria College, and my home department, the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology. Finally, I also want to give a special thanks to my students who are members of my research lab, Periscope. You've seen many of them today already. They were at the registration desks. They were making conversations between bites of food. They're working the doors, and they're going to be working our Q&A slides. And they were also getting posters out across the city. So really big thanks to them as well. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what to expect for tonight. I've prepared some questions for our panelists, and we'll use these to engage in a discussion for the first portion of the evening. After that, we're going to open it up to you, and we're going to get questions that you want to ask directed at the members of the panel. So during this Q&A period, we're going to provide you with a QR code on these big screens behind me, and you'll be able to scan that code with your mobile device and then type in your question using a program called Slido. And then in addition to being able to add your own question to the queue, you'll also be able to see the questions that other people have posed and to upvote the questions that you like the best. That way we see the questions that are most wanted by the audience rise to the top. And then once we get to that portion of the evening, so before we move to Q&A, I'll give a little bit more instructions on that. But for now, you'll just be listening to our conversation as we start. Having said that, if you have questions that come up already as you're listening to us discuss, you're welcome to start adding them to the Slido program. Okay, so the last thing I want to note is that this event is being recorded, and we do have a photographer, a wonderful photographer present, and our videos and photos may be posted online, hopefully sometime next week. So with all that covered, let me now tell you a little bit about our esteemed panelists. Okay, so I'll have you raise your hand when I mention your name, because we've seated in a slightly different order. But first we have Michael Inzlicht. He's a professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Toronto and a research lead at the Schwartz-Reisman Institute. His research uses methods borrowed from social psychology, from cognitive science and neuroscience to understand the nature of the mental effort we use to reach our goals and the nature of leisure activities that we do for fun. Michael's work has been featured in media outlets around the world, including the New York Times, the Globe and Mail, BBC News, Time, the Daily Telegraph, and the CBC, among many others. He's also a director of the Work and Play Lab, committed to open and transparent science, which includes publicly posting data and materials, often pre-registering studies, and regularly running replication studies. We're also joined tonight by Anastasia Kuzminykh, who is an assistant professor at the iSchool here at the University of Toronto, where her research analyzes the complex communication environments and designs corresponding systems to advance user performance. Anastasia has worked with both industry, including Google and Microsoft research, and research institutions like Ben Gurion across the world. And here at the University of Toronto, her research group explores the role of technology in communication, organization of knowledge, and information ecosystems. She's also a founder and director of the Toronto Human AI Interaction School. We have also Jocelyn Maclure visiting from Montreal. Jocelyn is a professor and Stephen A. Jaroslawski Chair in Human Nature and Technology at McGill University. Jocelyn's research expertise is in moral and political philosophy. His recent work on artificial intelligence and on end-of-life issues led him to explore different metaphysical questions, ranging from the mind-body problem to the enigma of personal identity. As a public philosopher, Jocelyn served as an expert analyst for the Bouchard-Taylor Commission on Cultural and Religious Accommodations, co-chaired the group of experts on medical assistance in dying, advanced medical directives and neurodegenerative diseases, and participated in numerous public debates. He's also the current president of the Quebec Ethics in Science and Technology Commission. And then finally, last but not least, is the person on the stage whom I've known the longest. We were undergraduates here at the University of Toronto together. We TA'd our first philosophy class together. And then we later reconnected when we were both visiting Duke University's Institute for the Brain Sciences in the summer of 2016. And now I get to welcome her to our stage. We're joined by Jelena Markovic, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Grenoble, where she is a fellow at the House of Creation and Innovation and affiliated with the Center for Philosophy of Memory and the Performance Lab. Jelena works in empirically informed philosophy of mind, but her expertise spans far beyond this. Her research examines the nature of grief, the nature of love, transformative experiences, and the philosophy of attention. Jelena, I'm so excited to have you be a part of this conversation. All right, so thank you, everybody. This is the group we've gathered. I hope you can appreciate just how interdisciplinary we all are, and I hope that makes the conversation especially interesting. So, without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to take a seat here and join them. All right, so I wanted to start this conversation by first of all asking the audience a question. Who here has used an AI chatbot? And don't be shy, it's a safe space. Okay, great. So that includes things like Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, Cohere, Gemini, DeepSeek, so on, right? Okay, many of you raise your hand, that's great. Now I want to ask our panelists the same question. Who here has used one of these chatbots? Okay, good, okay, honesty, I like this. So these are impressive tools, of course, right? But I think they're possibly more than that, and that's what brings this conversation to the forefront of our minds. So a recent New Yorker article by Patricia Marks discusses a report that made my jaw drop. What she says is that Brigham Young University's Wheatley Institute found that 19% of adults in the United States have chatted with an AI romantic partner. 19% of adults in the US. The chatbot company Joy AI cites a poll reporting that 83% of Gen Zers believed that they could form a deep emotional bond with a chatbot. 80% could imagine marrying one. And 75% felt that relationships with AI companions could fully replace human couplings. So I'm a millennial, I'm old. This kind of shocked me. But I also, have the perspective of knowing that it wasn't too long ago where in North America, many people found it unacceptable to be in same-sex relationships. In the 1950s, many interracial couples, it was illegal to be in an interracial couple in many states in the US. So I have to ask myself, am I being antiquated in my views? And I guess I want to pose, sort of start the conversation off with that idea that maybe we need a new perspective on this, but also, maybe we do want to push back. So with that in mind, I want to turn my first question to Jocelyn and ask, what makes a relationship real? So Jocelyn, being a philosopher, hopefully can give us some insight here.
All right. Thank you so much, Karina, and to everyone else involved for the invitation and putting together this wonderful panel. I'm Gen X, so I think that we're screwed, basically, and that no one has a clue what's going on. Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. We really need to figure out what kind of things are these AI systems, right? So we need to do like the ontology of generative AI. What's their mode of existence? How should we describe them? And we're not very far, I think, in that reflection so far. But with regard to your question, of course, my answer, some of you will think that it's anthropocentric, but it's quite normal because we came up with many concepts to better understand human nature and human life, human experience. And it seemed to me that a genuine relationship involves some form of mutual recognition, right? So you need two conscious moral agents who recognize each other, who recognize each other as worthy of concern, worthy of care, and if they are, that relationship is a form of companionship. We often call these systems like AI companions. It seems to me that, you need to have a form of and capacity to care about the well-being of the other, right? So you need some form of goodwill, and you need some reciprocity. Also, I think for the most kind of typical form of or genuine relationships or companionship in particular, if a purely one-sided relationship, usually we wouldn't describe it as a true form of companionship, right? It's a relation between two, agents who care for each other. And the last point that I would make is that it could have, like the agents involved could have done otherwise, right? You could have decided not to care about the well-being of the other, not to assist them. A companion literally, stand by the other one and is ready to lend a helping hand when necessary and so on. But you're not a true companion if you're coerced to do it or if you're paid to do it, right? That's other form of relationships. And I don't think that an AI can care about the well-being of other. And there's, of course, no form of genuine reciprocity. So I'm among those who think that we should always describe them as tools, as algorithmic systems that can be useful. But I want to resist the impetus to anthropomorphize them, and I don't think that they qualify for like that form of genuine relationships or companionship in particular.
Okay, great. I just wanted to add a thanks as well to Daniel Brown for putting that New Yorker article on my radar, by the way, because I thought that was very timely. So, Jocelyn, in your answer, you mentioned anthropomorphism a few times. I want to ask our panelist from the HCI background, Anastasia, to weigh in. What is anthropomorphism? And why is it so natural for us to do this, like as Jocelyn described, to anthropomorphize these AI systems?
Right. So when we talk about anthropomorphization, there are actually different phenomena that we put under this term, which makes it a little bit complicated. I think what we're talking about right now is anthropomorphized perception, and that is something that happens in humans mindlessly. So that is our tendency to assign this human-like, life-like qualities. It's not necessarily that we think that the whole thing is human, but we assign some qualities, like let's say the emotional reactions or intentions or some cognitive processes to non-life objects. And then there is anthropomorphization by design, where we do different design elements in the system to kind of provoke these anthropomorphized perceptions. So let's say when chatbots add laughter or just the fact of using human-like voice, or different movements maybe in robots, right? So these are the anthropomorphized design elements to cause anthropomorphized perceptions. Why is it so natural for us? Because we best understand ourselves. So whenever some system is, for some reason, is complicated for us, or we don't know what to expect, or something is happening that we don't know how to explain, the easiest way for us is to explain it from the human perspective. So maybe people know, like, I don't know, let's say if your car doesn't want to start and you're really late for some meeting and you start trying to convince your car to start, like, please, I really need to go. So this is an element of that mindless anthropomorphization. So it's not only happening necessarily with AI systems. However, yes, the more intelligent the system is and the harder it is for us to understand what it is, the more we're going to be anthropomorphizing it mindlessly.
Okay, thank you. And are there risks involved in that? Like, and I mean, open this to Anastasia, but also anyone. Does the anthropomorphism lead to sort of potentially dangerous outcomes for us?
Yes, but also there are advantages to that. I think the biggest risk is to overinterpret something, right? So when you're, let's say, when you start assigning some intentions or carrying motives to the system when it doesn't really have it, that is definitely a danger, because then you start acting correspondingly while, like, your interpretation is wrong. But it also helps us to interpret. It helps us to build not necessarily romantic relationship, but relationship in a sense of, like, the sense of ownership, the sense of this sense of being able to relate to whatever is going on in the system, which are definitely positive things.
I've often been wondering about whether or not the use of language by these chatbots makes it, like, especially difficult for us not to anthropomorphize. And of course, you're right, like, great examples of, sometimes you're begging with your car to, like, please just behave itself, as if it has some kind of, like, intentionality or agency. But I wonder, for the panelists, is there something about language here that is especially difficult for us not to want to attribute mental states to it? Anyone want to jump in? Yeah, Michael?
Sure, I can jump in. I think just to kind of plus one what you just said, I think we readily anthropomorphize, and you see it all around you. Children do it all the time with stuffed animals, with imaginary friends. That movie from a long time ago, Castaway, with Tom Hanks, who became friends. He had no one on this deserted island, and became friends with a ball. And it was hard for him to say goodbye to Wilson.
Wilson.
Wilson, right? So I think it readily happens. Now, add to that this machinery that readily anthropomorphizes, and now we've never interacted with a thing that talked back to us and can actually respond to us. Of course, we're going to anthropomorphize. Of course, we're going to see it as real. And I think there are truly real dangers because of that. Can get us. I mean, some good things, but also lots of bad things too.
Yeah.
Maybe quickly, I think you're right to ask the question. So we have that natural propensity to anthropomorphize, very often like inert entities. But when we interact linguistically, when we communicate with others, we bring many kind of presuppositions, right? In most cases, if I interact with someone that I know or that I don't know, I will kind of presume some, some good faith or goodwill on the other's part, right? If I ask for directions, someone I don't know, I will not presume that he's trying to fool me. I will kind of bring some presupposition that we're there to understand each other, maybe to help each other. Sometimes we need to be vigilant, right? If someone wants to sell something to me, now I know that I have to be on my guards, but in most linguistic interactions, I bring the kind of presuppositions that we're there to understand each other and perhaps to agree or to help each other, or at least to coordinate our action and so on. So we bring all these presuppositions when we interact linguistically, and now we have these new entities that can communicate fluently, generate very plausible, answers. So of course we will bring, I think, these assumptions. Yeah.
Yes.
Agree. I think it's maybe not just about language itself, because let's say it was a lot of text interfaces, we also had language there. I think it's the question of the freedom of interpretation. So when, let's say, we talk to each other, human to human, whatever I say, I know it can be interpreted in many different ways. But when you're talking to to a typical classical machine, there is one expected interpretation that you would have from that. So I think from that uncertainty of how you're going to be understood and what the next action would be, which comes in the language dynamics, right, in the language-based interaction dynamics, that's where the anthropomorphization might be coming from.
That's helpful. So let's move to a question for Michael. You published a study, I would say recently, but it may not have been so recent that you ran the study. But it was a really interesting study about how AI chatbots are able to show empathy and have a kind of like emotional endurance where humans maybe sort of run out of the kind of energy it takes for that. Could you describe that study a little bit and maybe explain sort of what you think the implications are?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we were, I think like everyone else, when ChatGPT came out, it was in November 22 or 23, I forget now, 22. So I was enthralled by this, I was amazed by this, and I started like doing what a psychologist does. I started giving it personality questionnaires and seeing, it could respond, not always, or certain things it couldn't do. And so one thing I do study before getting into AI is empathy and how empathy can be effortful. So we like to think that empathy is automatic, it just happens to us. That's not the case, we have to generate it. That takes energy or time or attention, and after a while we get tired and we burn out. So people who work in empathy professions, compassion professions, they often experience burnout. So there are some negative qualities of empathy. Empathy can also be biased. Like we tend to be more empathic to in-group members, people like us, and less empathic to people not like us. Empathy can also lead us occasionally to make immoral decisions. So think about your kids or your family. If you empathize with them, you might want to favor them. You will favor them over other people. So you'll kind of sacrifice the value of merit or fairness to give favors to those you empathize with. So there's some negative qualities to empathy. So the first thing I did was I wanted to test AI, generative AI on these various qualities. And what I found was remarkable and also not surprising. It chose, I gave it a choice. It said, I can't really make choices. Well, choose anyways. And it always chose to empathize. It never chose to avoid empathy. Probably fine-tuned. I don't think it's a natural quality of the LLM. It never got tired. It constantly would empathize. It didn't show tribal empathy. It showed equal empathy to different kinds of groups. And it didn't show biased moral reasoning after empathizing. So at least in theory, it seemed like remarkable, better than humans. So, well, what if we actually compare apples to apples? Like get a empathic, let's say, scenario that I would give in a psychology study, and then have a person generate an empathic response to that scenario. So a scenario could be like, my mother is elderly, she lives alone, her memory's starting to go, and I'm worried about her, and I live in a different city. And then feed that to ChatGPT, ask it just to respond empathically. We get the exact same scenarios to humans, including in some cases to expert empathizers. We got crisis line responders who work in phone lines across Canada to respond to these prompts. And then what we did was we gave the prompt and the response, both the AI response and the human response, to third parties. And we had a few thousand people who responded to this. And what we found was that third parties rated AI's statements as being higher in compassion. Third parties described, they thought the person who received those statements would be heard more, validated more, cared for more, right? Cared for more by an AI. We also, by the way, we sometimes told people, sometimes we didn't tell them who generated the statements. They just saw the statements, and in that comparison, AI always did better. Occasionally, we also would be transparent. This is an AI, that's a human. People still preferred the AI, even when they knew it was a machine. Then another iteration of the studies, now we got first-person accounts. So now you tell us something that's bothering you, that you want to get off your chest. And then fed it to the AI, it responded, we had a human, responded, and then compare. Same response. Now it's my feelings, my story, my suffering. And they said they felt more cared for, more validated by the AI. So it's remarkable, especially since, an AI is not empathic, right? It's not conscious, it doesn't have emotions. Empathy, you can think of empathy as an emotion elicited by observing someone else's suffering or joy, any kind of emotional response. If you don't have consciousness or you don't have emotions, you're not empathic. But it can produce empathic statements that make people feel heard, make people feel cared for. And that's kind of a remarkable thing, especially when people know about it.
Yeah, Jelena, thank you, Michael.
Can I have a follow-up question to this?
Please.
I'm just wondering, so in a way, like what is the paradigmatic expression of empathy? Because in a lot of our day-to-day lives, the paradigmatic expression seems to be just a silent witnessing of the other person, or just co-presence in the same space or something. So if we treat that as the sort of paradigm case for emotional expression, it's still not clear who would be better. I mean, of course the LLM is going to be better at generating statements. That's its job, right?
Yeah. I mean, so witnessing is not always just sitting there. So witnessing could be, I see what you're saying. You're upset about your mother. I can see that. I can see you're in pain. And an LLM can do that very, very well. So one thing, this is not work from our lab, it's a work from Desmond Ong's lab as a computer scientist and psychologist at University of Texas Austin. He finds similar patterns of results. But what he did find is that with humans, there's a great deal of variability in our responses. So you have some amazing empathizers who come up with like elaborate statements that really make people feel good. You have some people who are kind of just nod and don't say much. It's a lot of really good and really bad humans. In terms of empathy, in terms of producing empathic statements. The LLMs were all homogeneous. It was a really narrow band of what they said, and they seemed to follow a script. It was a very good script. Reflect, talk about common humanity, and then maybe say, kind of looking forward what they can do. And they seem to follow the script over and over again. Again, a really effective one. And also humans use scripts too. Right? So you're a therapist, you learn to be a therapist, you might get a kind of example script of what you could say. Because, if your job is to be empathic, and it might not come as naturally to you, so you also need to learn that. So it's quite interesting, though, that it kind of fell in this script, and I wonder if this actually will be a negative, a net negative at some level. Our studies are one shot, one time only. It's not like months or weeks of interactions. If they hear the same kind of script over and over and over again, will they start discounting it, like the notifications on your phone? It's the same thing that I'm hearing over and over again, and maybe it'll be less effective. So we haven't done those studies yet, though.
That's interesting. Yeah, Anastasia?
Yeah, I'm wondering also what it's going to be over the years as people learn, as society learns to interpret whatever the LLM is outputting and recognizing the lack of intention behind that, whether once people know that it is produced by AI, they still would be the same reaction specifically for empathy, right? Because let's say for the quality of writing, we probably can look at that more or less objectively. But for these intention-based instructions and interpretations, I wonder what the dynamic would be over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is also raising, a few questions I want to ask in this space. So the first one I'll start with is, do you think it matters? I guess this is to the panelists in general, but maybe we'll start with Jelena here. But to what extent do you think it matters if like this affection or emotion, these statements, these empathetic statements are simulated rather than sincere in the sense of having this underlying psychological experience behind it?
Yeah, I mean, you were initially thinking about this in the context of love. If a person expressed to us affection and emotion and all these things and they were not sincere, that would be very alarming to us, and we really wouldn't like that. But with the LLM, there isn't the same contrast between sincerity and insincerity. It's not really capable of being insincere. So there just isn't this mental state behind what they're saying. Honestly, what I worry about or wonder about is whether we actually need or whether we actually take a realist attitude about the mental states of LLMs, or if we're able to take, the intentional stance towards them, if we're able to treat them like they have mental states, and that is successful at predicting their, outputs and their behaviors, whether that we just act like they do have mental states and then respond emotionally accordingly.
And in that case, would that be sufficient to sort of fulfill our emotional needs as humans or as users of the systems? Michael, what do you think?
Well, in response to that, I also want to respond to something Jocelyn said earlier, which I really liked your definition of what a friendship is, companionship, and first you said you defined it as being conscious, like the two agents need to be conscious. I might want to argue with that, but you also said something else, which I think is more interesting, and that is that these agents need to be able to make choices. Okay, so having agency, I guess, being able to make choices. But what is stopping an AI company from giving LLMs some choice? So when certain thresholds are met, when certain conditions are met in an interaction, with some probability, I'm going to respond this way. And with some probability, I won't respond this way. And it looks to me like you're making a choice. You've seen me, I do think LLMs will soon be able to perceive. You can upload images, they can see what's in the image. So it sees I'm in distress. And then it's programmed to be when someone's in distress, here's a host of responses you can make. And in some sense, it's programmed to make choices. But I could argue that so are we. We're programmed also to make choices. A different designer. So wouldn't that suffice?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I understand that it would be introducing some form of randomness in the system, right? Or is it already the case with those stochastic machines where you prompt them the same way and sometimes you have different outputs? So, but in either way, randomness doesn't give us, I think, the kind of recognition that we're craving for. So it seems to me that if an empathic response is kind of soothing, reassuring, comforting, and so on, it's because, again, there is another, conscious moral agent who decide to care for us, to try to understand what we're going through, to share some of our emotions, and that has our well-being, at heart. And that's why empathy is so powerful. So I suppose that, well, for many of us, even if there's some randomness in the answers of the LLMs, it won't have that kind of effect because of the way that we conceive the machine. But I fully recognize that that's like a psychological question here, and I understand that many others will bring different kind of psychological, affective reactions to these outputs. I don't see how it can work for me, but it looks like it may be working for others, but we'll see in the longer term also. Yeah, that's how I would respond.
Just one clarity, so randomness, I think I know what you mean by randomness, but what I was describing is not so much randomness, but responding to the actual environment, right? So it's not going to, a bot that, some future bot programmed, it's not just expressing empathy randomly, it's expressing it when it perceives certain things in me. And then it goes into
So let's say that you have a pseudo reasoning model, because they're not really reasoning, but you have the chain of thoughts, and okay, I could go this way or I could go this way. There are two options, and sometimes they would go for A, other times they would go for B. For me, it's still the same kind of statistical engine behind, and it makes plausible reactions because of the patterns picked up in the training phase. Yeah, again, I agree that others will react differently to these outputs.
So there's the question of, do these systems actually have agency? Can we be realists, as Jelena says, about the emotions they have or the capacities, or the emotions they show or the capacities they have? But let's imagine that, somehow we kind of agree to bypass that question or accept that they don't have that. Could these systems nonetheless fill our emotional needs? So Jocelyn, I take it your position is no, they couldn't, right? Somehow our emotional needs just can't be met by some kind of interlocutor that lacks that underlying capacity to feel emotion, to give a kind of affective response. Is that shared by, let's say, Anastasia, Jelena, Michael? I'd like to get like a little bit on that, and in part, sort of raising this question because we're seeing these systems increasingly be used to, either by companies in a way that suggests that they could be used to serve as therapists or to meet people's needs if they're feeling lonely, but also by users of more general purpose systems to almost sort of approach them as systems that do those things, or to use them as systems that can do those things. Do you want to start, Anastasia? Yeah.
I don't know. I think by observing what's going on in the world right now, we're learning a lot about ourselves. The fact that a lot of people turn to these agents for the quality of interaction that they require already tells us a lot about the way how we're interacting. If it would be always just that people want to be pleased and, I don't know, agreed with, then that would be more or less explained by some basic biases. But that's not the case. People are coming also for arguing and for, I don't know, maybe some disagreements. They also turn to the agents. I mean, not all humans can satisfy our emotional needs either. I don't know. So let's say with virtual pets. For a while, it was much less controversial topic socially, right? And let's say when I was growing up, we used to play Tamagotchi, and everyone was like really in love with those. And it was fine, and everyone was attaching to those animals, and it was okay to form relationship with your Tamagotchi. Now, I think there are much more significant social questions that we're touching here, because there is a reproductive process involved. There is just survival of us as human species involved. And I think that is why it becomes much more sensitive and much more difficult question for us. I don't really, I'm probably going to say something that's going to cause a lot of reactions, but I don't think there is necessarily anything bad if, let's say, somebody learns to communicate properly in relationship and practices on an agent, right? Or let's say learns to recognize their own emotions, or, I don't know, articulate things. That would be fantastic. Yeah, and how it is related to the more complex societal problems, I think we need a sociologist to talk about that and how dangerous it is for us.
That's good. So a sociologist next year. Michael, go ahead.
Okay, I'm not a sociologist, I'm a social psychologist, and I probably will say something even more extreme than you, Anastasia. I think you touched on this already, Karina, but in terms of the number of people using this for this, so like it's according to Harvard Business Review, I just saw this yesterday, the number one use for LLMs today is for therapy and for companionship. That wasn't true in 2024, so it was number 3 in 2024. It was productivity and technical writing in 2024. Now it's for companionship. So people are doing this. And there's a reason they're doing it. Okay, there's a reason. There's more people than ever have 0, not 1, not 2, 0 friends. Okay? There are people who live in rural environments where there's no one near them, or are housebound or disabled. There's a lot of emotional needs that are not being met. So apparently, in the US, according to one analysis, over 50% of women who are seeking mental health support therapy could not get therapy. Either it was too expensive, they couldn't get an appointment, waiting lines, no one in their town, etc. So there's a massive need, and that's what's being filled now by these companies. And I'm not sure necessarily for good. I think it can be for good, but I think there's also lots of danger. So like, I think the main thing we got to say is like, people are using it now already. It's been out and kind of decent for only really a couple of years. Let's see in 5 years, 10 years, what it's like for well-being. We don't know. We don't know yet. We don't even have, all we know is one shot, it looks okay. We don't even know if it's good for a week or a month or a few months.
Yeah, that's a great question about these like more longitudinal studies that we need with these with these devices and what kind of effects that's having on people's psychology over time. Okay, I want to turn to our philosophers to ask the hard-hitting questions. First of all, I want to ask about the question of love. What is love? Can we be in love with machines? Would that be socially acceptable? Let's start with the highest conceptual question here, Jelena. No pressure.
Okay, I wrote some notes down. Okay, so here are some things that we might take to be important, because I just thought this was such an enormous question. Yeah, so some things that we take to be important when we talk about loving someone or being loved by someone. So one, caring for that person for their own sake, caring for their well-being, being cared for, valuing the other person for their own sake, appreciating their qualities. Also, we think of love as being attached to a particular, so we don't think of the people we love as fungible and replaceable for other people with equal or better qualities or something. Even in relationships where we're initially drawn to someone because of the qualities that they have, that once we're in love with them or love them, there's a sort of stability and they're able to change and our love for them continues. There's also, I'm not entirely sure how to spell this out, but there's this sort of expansion of self that happens with love. So you are this, autonomous being with your own perspective on the world. You love this other, person or being that's also autonomous, has their own perspective on the world, and you come together and there's a sort of expansion of self. There's like a shared world of meanings that can be created. And that's part of what's so beautiful and attractive and wonderful about this experience. There's also a sort of reshaping of your will and yourself that happens especially in romantic love. Which can be for better or for worse, even when you don't want it to happen. You find yourself sort of emphasizing certain parts of yourself, seeing yourself through the lens of this person, suddenly internalizing their preferences, suddenly prioritizing them. So there's a sort of, transformation of self that can happen. Okay, what was your second question?
Well, let's good. Prepared.
Try to
prepared
be
panelist. You mentioned romantic love. What other types of love are there? Let's distinguished kinds of love.
There's, my Aristotle is a bit rusty, but there's eros, so that's romantic love, and there's philia, right, which is more like friendship, I take it. And he had another concept, agape, but that's more, kind of cosmic almost, the kind of love that God has for us, I suppose, and vice versa. So I think that there were three types, but I get that for us, like eros and philia would be the two main types, I suppose.
I can imagine a kind of familial love, the love you have for your family being kind of different, where, maybe we're not friends, certainly not romantic, but there's a feeling of love and it's not a godlike relationship either, so okay. So already we have a few type of distinctions here. So let's focus on friendship, the kind of friendship love, the love you have for friends, and the love you can have in a romantic relationship. Are either of those the types of things that we can have with a machine? And let's assume it's the kind of machine we have today. So not a machine that's, hypothetically in the future capable of intentionality and consciousness and mindedness. Let's talk about like ChatGPT 5, the one that's out.
I wonder if we can we answer that question by asking one other question, which is, can we feel love for our pets? They don't talk, they're conscious. I'm not sure they have necessarily free will. We own them, they can't leave. And I think we think they love us back. Now it's different than a machine, I get it. But I don't think that's controversial to say that we can love our pets and our pets love us. Now, there's a few key things that are missing, but I think that's a better starting point than going from human to human.
Yeah, good. What do we want to say about that? It's going to fall more into the companionship category.
One thing I'm still wondering about is, do we care about the chatbot for its own sake? It seems like part of what's, attractive or appealing about them is that they don't have needs that we have to take care of. Whereas this is in contrast to our human loved ones who are needy, and we have to try to navigate and negotiate conflicts between them.
Yeah, good. So in most most human relationships, there's like give and take. There's like a needs being met on both sides, and it's not one directional. There's, exceptions where like the CEO hires their secretary to fill all their needs, but we don't, it's more transactional, that type of relationship. Yeah. Anastasia?
There is also a question, the ability of distinguishing different entities. So let's say how easy it is for me to distinguish my, let's say, whatever, ChatGPT from your ChatGPT, if I just look at them, right? And then what would it mean for me to love my ChatGPT and then not yours, but how do I know which one is mine, which one is yours? There is some elements of this ownership that can be interpreted, and especially when we add some visualizations to particular agents, but I think the dynamic nature of those representations and of those boundaries adds an interesting angle to this relationship building, right? So it's whatever you're interpreting there. But I think if we think about human-human interaction, human-human communication patterns and relationships, when you have a pen pal, for instance, or if you are in long-distance relationship with someone you've never met and you're only, let's say, sending letters to each other or messages, we are imagining all those boundaries, that it's an actual person. Maybe it's like 100 people sitting there writing these letters. You don't know. And so I think what we are imagining, so our imagined audience there, imagined agent rather than reality makes more, plays bigger role there. And then the way how that imagination is built is a dynamic process, and I think that society would start reacting and reshaping those interpretations as well.
Yeah, great. That also picks up, I think, nicely on a few of the elements that Jelena touched on of like, can you just swap out that individual, in this case, let's say ChatGPT that someone's formed a relationship with, how easily can that just be swapped out with another system?
There's evidence that it can't be. So there's a case, actually it was in that same New York article, I believe. Replica, which is a company that sells subscriptions to companion AIs. And I think like a few years ago, it had many users, and then at some point it changed its algorithm. And people then described that their bots, their romantic partners in some cases, were different. They called them lobotomized. And it was such an uproar, in fact, that for people who had the bots before, they grandfathered in the old algorithm. So that's clearly a case where they're selective about, no, it's that bot, it's that person or that agent that I love. And I know the difference.
Response, Jelena, were you gonna?
I don't know. Maybe I was just going to use the type token distinction. Like it seems like it might change our boundaries of what a particular is. Yeah, when it comes to people are bounded in their bodies, we more or less think. But instead of applying that concept to the chatbot, it seems like our concepts might change instead from the bottom up based on how people interact. And we might think, okay, well, the particular isn't really a particular chatbot, but it's the algorithm, version 4.0, the type, yeah.
Or if we think about specific models, so let's say you built your own model and just interacting with that specific model, that might define some boundaries as well. And then the perception of, okay, there is like a cheaper model that everyone has access to, and then there is a more expensive model that, like, I don't know, only let's say, have access to. And through that defining. But yeah, I don't think that we as designers of technologies have not really developed any what we call signifiers, like ways of showing to the user of where the boundaries are, because there are basically no boundaries.
This is good. I'm working on a paper on the metaphysics of AI, which is going to get into some of this, so that's helpful. Jocelyn?
Yeah, so I suppose that this is helpful because then we can do some distinctions, so there are some generic chatbots, right? You can use ChatGPT, or I suppose that Grok would be less empathic, right? But sometimes you might kind of contextualize or personify your chatbot, right? And that's what the Replica was doing. So some users, at some point, they changed the parameters, and you couldn't go very far in the romantic relation with the bot because, so I think that things went out of hands in some cases, but some users describe themselves as being heartbroken after and character AI is doing the same also, right? Where you can really personify some maybe real persons or invent new characters, but then you have some new digital particulars, and a grief bot would also be one example of how you particularize a chatbot, right? So probably we need to distinguish between both.
So Jocelyn and I have been working on this project around so-called grief bots. Jocelyn, do you want to say what these are? Because who's heard of these grief bots before? Okay, a few people have, but actually not many hands. Jocelyn, do you want to say a little bit about what these are?
Yeah, so basically it's developing a model that would learn on the data of a deceased person, or you can train it while the person is alive, but you use all the digital data that you have access to, and you want to create a post-mortem kind of replica or avatar of the deceased person, so you can keep on interacting with them. So in Black Mirrors, there was one episode, right? It was really like foresighted so more and more people now are interested in interacting with a chatbot that would kind of predict the reactions of the deceased. So yeah, these are, and the idea is that maybe it would help some bereaved persons to do to grieve the loss.
Okay, now another hard-hitting question for Jelena. What is grief? Let's start with that.
Grief is a problem. So grief is a holistic process of responding and navigating a significant personal loss. So we can think about it along Michael Cholby's lines of what you grieve is something that you had invested your practical identity in, so something or someone who's a big part of how you see your life as meaningful, how you see your actions as worth doing. And then, so what happens when you lose a person like that is a lot of how you assume the world to work and make sense of the world, a lot of your habitual activities, a lot of how you orient yourself to the future no longer makes sense really because it sort of implicitly relied on this other person for its meaning. And so you end up in a situation where you're very disoriented and you sort of have to remap yourself, your world, your social life. So Thomas Addig calls grief relearning the world after the loss. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now the question. So Jocelyn's suggesting there's this, this use of chatbots that, people see an opportunity to use these chatbots to help overcome this grieving process. So I guess one question I have is, intuitively it does seem that over time, at the face of an immediate severe loss in one's life, one's thrown into this, hurricane of grief. And then over time, one sort of emerges from it. So there seems like there's an opportunity to overcome grief. It's not a lasting state. And if we can accept that, then there's something that happens that gets you through grief. You can overcome grief in some way. Can that be done through conversation? Like it's essentially what we're doing with these chatbots is like talking with them. Is that seen as a normal step to overcoming grief? Maybe this to Jelena?
Well, I don't think conversation would be enough because I think you literally have to be in the different situations in your life and encounter them under the new terms of this person is no longer there, and you have to make sense of those situations. So I don't think you could purely overcome it through conversation or something. I think you would actually have to have holidays without the person, sort through their things, have dinner without them. You be the one to do the taxes now because they used to do the taxes, and So yeah, I don't think it could be enough. So there's a question of could it help? Could it be a tool? I mean, of course, like bereaved people want to talk to other people about their deceased loved ones and share stories about them, and typically find that comforting. And then, I mean, I think your question in part about grief bots, specifically, like the ones that are made to simulate the deceased, not just general chatbot, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And yeah, so there's, I mean, you can imagine either in one scenario, this kind of grief bot is like, let me take all the data that I can scrape from my, dead father's computer and try to regenerate him so I can seek his counsel throughout life. Or alternatively, let me use a chatbot where I can just share all my nice, happy memories with him and have someone kind of bear witness to that and tell me, oh, that was really nice to hear about. So there's different ways in which one could use a chatbot to help with this process, and the grief bot is more the first scenario there. But it does raise it raises a bunch of questions, but one of which is as Jelena says, it's like part of overcoming grief would be encountering the world without that person. And if this system is built to recreate that person, it's almost prolonging, or pushing back the experience of life without them. So does that suggest that this is not a helpful tool? And Michael, I see the microphone coming, so go ahead, yeah.
Well, this question and where we're going with grief reminds me of something Paul Bloom was my colleague in the psych department, and he wrote an interesting article, also in the New Yorker, about friendship and loneliness and AI. And he made a really provocative statement towards the middle of his piece where he argued, do we want to get rid of some negative emotions? Like, do we want, so I was trying to make the case earlier that bots, friendship bots can be good because it lowers our loneliness, and loneliness is unpleasant, and we'd be happier that way. He makes the argument that loneliness, like other emotions like grief, are functional. They help you navigate your world. And loneliness would instigate you to start seeking out, social stimulation, to make friends. So if you've got this replacement friend that lowers your loneliness, you no longer have that hunger to go out in the world. I wonder if the same thing would happen with grief. Grief is also an emotion that's functional. And if you had the first kind of grief bot that you mentioned, which is like a recreation of your deceased and loved one, they're still there. You can still talk to them. You can still get their advice. Maybe they'll still nag you in the way your deceased parent or whatever it was nagged you. And maybe that will not, I'm not exactly sure what function grief serves, but I suspect it's something that is good. So I wonder by having this grief bot, you're not going through this normal process that might be actually healthy for you.
Yeah, Jocelyn.
Yeah, if I can just add something, there are many views in the philosophy of emotion that says that emotions are not just kind of obstacle to reasoning and cognition, right? That they play an essential cognitive role that helps us navigating our complex worlds, right? Sometimes by feeling some emotions, we perceive some significant features of the situation that we're in, and loneliness, of course, can be devastating, right? And some people need help, that's for sure. But there are other reactions where, okay, so loneliness feels painful, so this is what I need to do to not to be so lonely, and that can be the impetus to invest in new activities, relationship, and so on. So I think that there's a role for so-called negative emotions. And with regard to grief bots in particular, yes, as Jelena said, so you want to, of course, remember the deceased person. You want to bring these memories with you, but in order to kind of reinvest in your new reality, like facing the new reality as it is, right? Without that person, reconstructing your practical identity in a way that will allow you to reorient yourself. Yeah, the ethicist in me is concerned that for some, it would have a detrimental effect. But in one of our workshops, we had a grief researcher who came, and she was pretty skeptical about grief bots, but she said there might be cases where, when trained therapists are involved and maybe you designed a grief bot, something that complicates the grieving process sometimes is when you couldn't say goodbye at the end, right? The circumstances surrounding death. And that researcher said, so maybe you designed that grief bot so that the bereaved can say goodbye. And then we move to the next steps. So perhaps there could be some limited circumstances where it could be beneficial. I think we need to be, especially the skeptics among us, we need to be open-minded. But I'm generally concerned about how it would interfere in the grieving process, that readaptation process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury's really still out on this. Like the optimists see it as another way of potentially scaffolding a sort of a somewhat imaginal interaction with the deceased person. And you know, we don't really have a Freudian view of grief anymore, where we've like invested our erotic energy into this person, and now we have to withdraw it so that we can invest it into another person. Rather, we think that we maintain continuing bonds with our deceased loved ones, so that, and a part of doing that is continuing to have conversations with them, you know, holding their, you know, mementos, going to the gravesite, you know, having these sort of imaginal, like people still sort of maintain an ongoing, you know, relationship with their deceased loved ones. So a sort of optimist way to see it is either as a transitional object or something that's part of your continuing, your grief, but that's a sort of a way to scaffold a continuing interaction and continuing bond with a deceased person. Then obviously there are all these other questions of, you know, it's a algorithm in a private company that's combining these data, and so, you know, that's sort of interfering with how you see them and your image of them. So there are all those questions, but there's a sort of optimistic way of seeing it that's it's not interfering with your grieving process, but we don't. And then the pessimist is just you're replacing the deceased person. There's certain possibilities of interaction that you've lost, but then you've just found a way to get them again. Yeah.
Very helpful. And yes, touching on a point that we haven't highlighted as much, but let's turn to now, which is that these, you know, these relationships with chatbots that folks are having is, at least in one scenario, very different than the types of relationships we have with other humans, insofar as that these chatbots are designed and owned by companies, often for profit. And so clearly the way these companies design chatbots matters. OpenAI came out fairly recently and publicly said that their ChatGPT 4.0 model was overly supportive, overly agreeable, overly flattering, described as sycophantic. So if you interacted with that model, you'll know anything you said was an incredible question, right? It was just fantastic that you asked that. Really enthusiastic, just loved the user, right? So the company thought, okay, this is problematic. It got some backlash, and it tried to correct this by releasing the model GPT-5. And in fact, actually, what happened after that was that it had some uproar because a lot of the users missed their enthusiastic, flattering friend. So the company has stuck by GPT-5, but it continues to raise these questions of exactly how do we want to fine-tune these models, how sycophantic should they be. Obviously, companies are motivated to have users be pleased by the product and to want to stay, stay engaged with it. So I want to turn to Anastasia and ask about, this question of interaction and designing these, how one designs this relationship in the appropriate way. Since your background is in part in human-computer interaction, I know this question is not new. It's been around for a really long time, but it's kind of playing out in new public ways with these models. So I guess the question is something like, just your thoughts, what are the kind of risks and things what are the things that companies need to navigate here? And, what do we need to look for a well-designed chatbot?
Big question. I think one of the new types of challenges, so you're right, the question on its own is not new. We saw it in many different types of technologies over decades. But we used to predominantly design technologies to address, to get to a particular goal or to help in a particular task, right? Or there was an outcome at the end. And now we're talking about technology that is helping a process, but then what does it mean to design a correct conversation? Well, it depends what this conversation is for, right? Or if we want to regulate a conversation, well, it depends on what kind of conversation we're regulating. And I think this, the fact that now it is decoupled, the process and the goal for which it is being used, or the diversity of goals for which it is being used, makes it really difficult to design solutions around that. especially when we talk about these general purpose agents like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. Sycophancy on its own, we had this conversation a little bit before the panel as well, sycophancy on its own is not necessarily always bad, and we all use it in human-human communication as well, and it allows us to bond, and it allows us to, when, let's say, we're brainstorming, there is a rule to say, not to say no, but to say yes and, right? So that yes is also part of sycophancy. I think it's the question of recognizing when it's a social rule, when it's a question of recognizing when someone is being someone is being agreeable with you for a particular reason or out of politeness, or I don't know, because we're short on time, let's say. And that is a problem with systems. And the fact that we cannot really control that, and the fact that we cannot control the degree of sycophancy that is being shown by the model. There is another bigger issue with that, that's not so much on the system side, but I think on the societal side more, is that, of course, it's much easier to genuinely interact with someone who is never going to show you negative emotions, or who is never going to be upset with you for no reason, or, I don't know, being annoyed at something. And especially if we're talking about children, let's say, learning to interact using the systems, learning this model, so real relationship would always require some kind of a sacrifice, right? So you need to, I don't know, if you don't pay enough attention to someone, eventually they stop going to be friends, I don't know, with your romantic partners. And that is not what we see with systems. And same with sycophancy. So if we need to deserve this agreeableness in some sense, right, over the course of our previous interactions. And with models, we don't. And so I think that is where the bigger problems there lay. And of course, the question of, within specific conversations, the question of locking ourselves in echo chambers of our opinions. But again, it depends on what type of conversation we're talking about and what's the goal of this interaction.
Are there specific relationships, like human-human relationships, that are now kind of being, let's say, taken over, or people are using chatbots for, like a therapist, for example, where we don't want that sycophancy? Like, really clearly we want friction for anyone.
Financial advice?
Yeah. Pardon?
Financial advice, education.
Therapy. I mean, I think therapy is a good therapist, validates, but also sets boundaries and reality constraints. And I think one of the biggest dangers right now is with sycophantic bots is that they will affirm delusions, and there's evidence that they are in fact doing that. There's cases in front of the court now where there's been suicides that have been attributed to interactions with chatbot friends that have been maybe too sycophantic. And a therapist sees a suicidal or a patient with suicidal ideation, like that's a red line, and will sometimes even have to call the police to get the person, make sure they're safe. How do you do that with a therapy bot? It's not clear, but right now it's dangerous.
Yeah, I fully agree. So if you have beliefs that could be harmful to you or to others, you can be radicalized through interaction with a chatbot. So it was already the case, right, with the new online public sphere, where, as epistemic agents, right, when we try to know what is the case, or when we form our belief, we're deeply influenced, of course, by views, opinions of others, right, and for testimonies and so on. And with the new public sphere, you can always find someone who will confirm your own priors in a way, right? But you're exposed to the chaos of the internet, so there can be conflicting viewpoints and so on, but it's already problematic as it is. But now, if chatbots become the interface, you're not even exposed to the other viewpoints, right? Because you just have the answers generated by the bot, and the sycophancy will kind of items like the confirmation bias, and may radicalize beliefs that are already problematic. So that's concerning, right? It's not concerning for many of us, but there are groups that are more vulnerable, and we need kind of safeguards for the more vulnerable among us.
That's great. So that leads to one of my next questions, which is, what kind of safeguards could we put in place Um, Another hard question. Anastasia, do you want to try us to start, or do you have a response? Yeah.
So safeguards for relationships, you mean?
Yeah, it could be for any type of interaction or relationship with these chatbots.
I think that is something that we need to figure out as a society, and I think it's going to take us some time to figure it out. I personally do not believe that just artificially preventing something from happening is helpful or efficient. So I think that we need to try to understand why particular processes are happening and then design around that. The unrealistic nature, also I personally, again, my own opinion, I do not think that just simulating relationship or some kind of interactions is necessarily good or bad. It is like it can be put in good use or bad use. But I think simulating unrealistic relationships, that is potentially dangerous. So I think where safeguards should be, and they are, like, people are trying to, countries and different companies are trying to start putting those safeguards. They're not working very well. But the fact that the system cannot pretend to be a human, right? But then, so let's say it's useful for scam situations, right? And again, still models find way of pretending to be human. And if it's, let's say, designed to be anthropomorphic, it can state once that it's not a model, but then act as a human. So is it pretending or is it not pretending? So I think that's where we need to start designing those safeguards. But again, it's not really clear what exactly to prevent, right? So we cannot really prevent we can prevent some kind of process. We cannot prevent an outcome. And so I think when we're talking about safeguards for relationships, that is an outcome. The question is, what are the processes that need to be regulated that lead to those outcomes? And because relationship is such a fundamental thing in our existence, it's like pretty much any interaction processes lead to relationships. So yeah, I think even if we would want to do something like that, I don't think we would want, as a society, as a community, we wouldn't even know where to start for that. So I think we want to think about what processes need to be regulated and then try figuring out how it corresponds to the outcomes and what we want around those outcomes.
Yeah, Jocelyn.
So something that I'm working on now, so I'm not sure exactly what would be the conclusions, but one way to go would be, so it's already kind of a popular opinion among AI ethicists that, say the standard ethical principles in bioethics, for instance, so autonomy, benevolence, non-malevolence, justice, are all relevant, and we see in these kind of relationships how they can be relevant, but that we probably need to add transparency when it comes to our relation with machines. And I think that we should try to work out what are the demands of transparency, and the hypothesis that I'm trying to test now is kind of radical transparency, so constant reiteration of the status of the bot as a machine that doesn't have any kind of emotions and genuine intentions and so on. So constant kind of self-disclosure of the status of the bot as a statistical engine to check our tendency to anthropomorphize rather than to exploit it. And that could be translated into kind of in the design of these machines and in some regulations also where there would be, duties on the part of the designers to, design built-in these kind of features. That's something, that's something that I think that we should explore. And there probably should be some prohibitions also. I think that today we learned that there's a third teenager who committed suicide after interacting, like sustained interaction. It's not the only cause for sure, but after sustained interaction with the chatbot.
Right, so that touches, I think, on a point you made earlier, Jocelyn, which is like, we know in society that there are more psychologically vulnerable groups than others. It's not clear how we could restrict users, but there's some places where we kind of know that the guardrails should approach or touch on, but how we do that is not always clear. But yeah, Michael.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one clear one, we're hearing a bunch of, these suicides by typically adolescents. I mean, it's one that presents itself as like, can there be some age limit to relational AI use? I think, my kids have been using ChatGPT for their schoolwork for a while now, but not for relationships. And I wonder, again, I'm not sure how you enforce this or what, but it seems like, I don't know, it's just, I was surprised. I saw this interview, maybe it was in New Yorker when they were talking about Meta is its chatbot, it's marketing it to children. And that just seems ripe with danger. Because these are vulnerable people, so I think at the very least that. And I just want to add one thing to what you said about the warnings, and this is consent. So I think consent with AI is really hard because we anthropomorphize so readily. And yeah, you sign it off, but then you're caught in the illusion. And even though I like your idea of like regular consent over and over again. Will that just not be the dietary labels on our food or the accept all cookies, right? There are apps to ignore those. That's regulation, I think, from the EU, I think, started. And everyone ignores those. So will it just be another thing that, no, I want to just talk to my chatbot, stop bothering me. So I worry how effective something like that might be.
I heard a rumor that some people read those dietary labels. I don't. So yeah, this is also a question of when this tips into, becoming manipulative if we don't know what's going on, for example. So I do want to plug this QR code again. We're going to now turn to our audience questions. And I'm hoping that some have already been added in there. Obviously, I tried to start this conversation by asking the questions that came to my mind, but surely there's major gaps in what I asked. So I'm excited to hear what all of you are thinking about and what all you want to have asked. So Rachel, let me go to you, and please continue to use that QR code and upvote the questions that you want most heard.
Yeah, so I will say we've already had 80 questions. So we have been putting them together into grouping them based on themes. So I'm going to ask a question that hopefully encapsulates the idea of what you wanted to address in your specific question, but they're going to be largely a bit more general. But because there's still going to be more questions coming in, just to warn you all, they're all very straightforward and easy to answer. So the first question here is, are there cases where AI relationships can bring more positives than negatives? What would or what could a healthy romantic relationship with a chatbot look like?
Okay, good. So we didn't flag anyone in particular for this, but if anyone wants to jump in first. Yeah, Anastasia?
Well, I think one of the positives, I think we mentioned it earlier, would be practicing communication, which is particularly important for a healthy relationship, and the ability to articulate and both what's going on with you and to practice empathy in the sense of the included listening and the ability to respond, and maybe even some different types of interaction, different types of communication patterns that can be in relationships. So that is definitely a positive, and learning what it means when somebody is communicating to you and talking to you. That's all what I thought about so far. Sorry.
Good. More positives, Jocelyn? Yeah.
I think there could be lots of positives. Like I hope it's been clear that I'm somewhat optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that again, people are saying they feel cared for, heard, and a lot of us want that regularly. We don't have enough of it. Again, it's a question of whether it will last, whether it's empty calories like chips, or whether it's actually nourishing. But so far, with very preliminary evidence, people are responding, and there's a reason why it's the #1 use case. There's a reason people are resonating with it. For multiple reasons. My wife is a therapist, and she has clients who between sessions will talk to ChatGPT for extra support, because my wife charges a lot of money. She can only see her clients once a week or once every 2 weeks. And in between, there's crises. There are moments where someone needs help, advice, support. They're up 3 a.m. in the morning. You're not going to call my wife. They can call ChatGPT. So there are, I think, lots of positives, lots of negatives too, but I was asked about positives. So I think there can be positives.
Jocelyn?
Yeah. So you mentioned, Anastasia, a few times this idea of, I think what I heard you saying is that perhaps we can look at how we relate to fictional objects, characters, right? And in some cases, we have rather healthy relations with fictional objects, right? We care for the characters in a novel or a movies and so on, and we move when something happened to them. And that's not unhealthy, but it's what some philosopher calls a game of make-believe, right? And but we're kind of conscious that we're playing that game of make-believe, and I'm concerned that with the AI chatbots, we won't be aware that that's actually the status of the entity that we're interacting with, because it's so much easier to anthropomorphize them. But perhaps many among us will have that kind of healthy relationship with the equivalent of a fictional character that is just very good, very talented, right? I'll always have something sensible to say. So if we can take that stance toward the AI, maybe it could be beneficial. I don't feel the need to do it, but I could see that others would, and it could be beneficial for them, but I fear that they might forget that it's actually a fictional object.
Yeah, it's a great example. And in some cases that like the engagement with fiction, or at least this is the view of some philosophers, that engagement with fictional narratives and with fictional objects or fictional characters allows us to express emotions that we may not have a natural opportunity to feel in our regular kind of more boring lives in a way, right? So in these narratives, many things can happen. And so they can test and bring up different emotions for us. And so there's like, you can imagine positive scenarios where this technology is built in a way that turns out really well and that can lend those opportunities to people. Let's pitch to our next question, Rachel.
So this is a very different tone, actually. Currently, there is a lot of stigma towards human-AI relationships, despite their, seemingly widespread use, with the creation of slurs for LLMs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or if you've seen them online, but there are online communities. This is like added context because I'm unfortunately very online, where users are creating sort of slurs for LLMs and seemingly the people who enjoy using them for companionship. I've lost my spot here. Is this a type of discrimination towards the person in the relationship, maybe the LLM in question as well? Again, these are all pretty open-ended questions in terms of like disciplinary background. So,
good, and I appreciate you not using any of the slurs, but I may look them up later. Okay, I'll pitch to Jocelyn.
Yeah. So is it? Who would be kind of wrong here? Is it the human user or the chatbot in the relationship?
So I did not put any of these questions in, so I think it seems to be towards the user largely.
Yeah. Okay, so despite what I said and then my kind of skepticism, there's something that we need to kind of respect in pluralistic societies like ours is what we call the reasonable pluralism of conceptions of the good life, basically, right? So people have different value systems, different conception of what makes life worthwhile and meaningful, and that includes attitudes toward technology and AI in particular. So if no one is harmed in these relations, I think that we should at the very least tolerate these interactions, right? If there's no harm, there's nothing to prevent there. But in some cases, there could be harm, right? Harm to self or harm to others, and we have to be very sensitive about these risks. But if not, we have to, just tolerate that there are different conceptions of the good relations with the AI.
Thanks. I want to just chime in there because I made a joke before, but I think that's the right sensibility, which is that lots of people have different hobbies, different things that they want to fill their time with, and as long as it's not hurting it, there's not an obvious case of harm, I think for the most part, my sensibilities say that we should tolerate that and be accepting of that. But let me turn to other responses here. Jelena?
I think it speaks to your point about choice earlier, Jocelyn. Yeah. We still place human relationships on a hierarchy above these sort of relationships, and I think in part because of this choice question. If it's an entity that will say yes to all takers for a relationship, then we develop a certain stigma about you must be in this relationship because you were not able to form human relationships.
You know, I think all of us on this panel are too old to answer this question. I think I find it weird. I suspect you do. It's what all of us do. There's some data in my lab looking at like people's attitudes towards different AI technologies, and the one that people are most opposed to are companionship AI. And of those who oppose it, a vast majority of them moralize that use, meaning they view it as no matter how much good it's going to bring or how little bad it's going to bring, it's forbidden. And correlates of this moralization are age, experience with AI, relying on a certain moral foundation, like a purity, relations are seen as sacred and pure. But I think, the next generation will be, some of you in this room are digital natives, so it's going to be AI natives, not born, 2-3 years ago, who will not know any other world. And I don't think for them it'll be that weird. But I definitely see lots of stigmatization of use, especially with companions. In fact, I remember once I was talking about it at a meeting, it was a former student of ours at U of T who was suffering from depression and had all kinds of issues, and all of a sudden came alive and started emailing me. And she started in a relationship. She didn't say a relationship, but it seemed like it with an AI, and all of a sudden she had a voice. And she was around again. And I had to ask, I wasn't sure if I could even tell her a story. I had to ask permission. She said, yes, absolutely, I'm not ashamed of this. But I suspect other people do judge her.
Anastasia?
Yeah, very big question. I think, well, whether it should be happening, of course, no, because nobody should be harassed for their opinions or actions. But it shows us some very significant fears that are out there in the society. It's not new for people to be scared of technological developments, and it was happening throughout, pretty much starting from ancient times, but then let's say, I don't know, in 18th century, 19th century, 20th century a lot, right? So people would react in these waves to processes like that. Right now it's AI. Whether this fear is completely ungrounded, I don't know. Again, nobody knows. We'll see where we are. As I was saying earlier, because it's related to some biological processes and survival of species, I think it becomes much more heated, this conversation, and the opinions and fears behind that. Yeah, and then what we as a society, again, allow within the societal boundaries, what behaviors we allow and what, let's say, using slur or stigmatizing someone, and what we do not allow. Again, I don't think that any of us individually can affect that much. These are bigger group processes, and unfortunately, as we see it with many other diversity perspectives, we now see that with relationship with AI.
Rachel, next question. Thank you, everyone.
So the formation of echo chambers and epistemic bubbles is a significant and documented worry in the use of social media. Does AI companionship, especially when the chatbot is sycophantic, create a personal echo chamber of sorts?
Yes. That's the biggest issue with them, yes. Several of PhD students in my group working from different angles on that problem, but yes, that is the main motivation to try to address these issues from the HCI perspective.
Are there ways to address that as a follow-up question? Like, are there suggestions that are coming out of that research?
I just had this conversation today. It was my student Paula sitting there. The problem is that people in general don't like to recognize other opinions, whether they come from LLMs or whether they come from other humans, and they would rather perceive someone's opinion that they agree with as a fact, rather than perceive some fact that they disagree with, right? A lot of things that we see right now with LLMs, it's nothing new, it's our typical cognitive biases in perception. Other ways, hopefully we're working on it. I think it's the ways of how information is represented, but it's not, we cannot just solve it by let's say interface design or some way of telling information. It needs to go hand in hand with the educational processes, with the development of particular ways of thinking, critical thinking overall. We cannot just rely everything on the LLM interface and suddenly expect people to become critical thinkers.
So for the personal use of a chatbot, it's hard to see. Hard to see how they don't contribute to consolidating echo chambers because of the sycophancy. If you're not looking for counter arguments actively, you won't get them, right? That's something that we didn't mention, but the bot doesn't care about anything by itself, right? You always have to prompt it. It doesn't have the equivalent of a will, right? You always have to trigger it. But there were some uses of generative AI to see if it could kind of de-radicalize individuals or incentivize people to change some erroneous belief for true ones. But it was in experiments where, it's either another person tried to convince you that you're wrong, and we're very defensive, right? And we engage in motivated reasoning when someone else that we see as threatening. But if it's the bot, the impersonal bot, some are more receptive to the kind of counter argument or counter facts. But you have to put the people in that situation, and that's not the situation we're in when we use it personally. So yeah.
There are actually studies that show that models become more psychopathic the more turns you have in a conversation. So they might start with the right answer or like whatever, right as in factually correct statement. But then if you keep talking to them and let's say keep disagreeing or changing your mind, the model would start being more agreeable with you. So speaking of kind of reinforcing the echo chambers. Yes.
That's great, thank you. Rachel?
Is our newfound reliance on AI for empathy, or sort of for roles that we often think of as requiring human empathy, indicative of a failure on the part of humanity to care for each other's well-being?
Kind of goes to the question, Anastasia, you were raising about we can ask ourselves why are we using these tools in the way we are, or what is the social need that's kind of open? Yeah.
And I will say there are also a lot of questions in the Slido about sort of like technology for technology's sake. And so I guess if you want to interpret this more broadly too, maybe comment a bit on the sort of, are we just developing these new tools to say that we've done it?
So with at least with empathy, it's been well documented now for at least a couple of decades that there's been a drop in self-reported empathy over the generations. So people reporting, maybe caring a little less about other people, small differences, but it's sustained over a couple of decades. And so maybe the use is reflecting that people have these needs that are being unmet. And I think the reason why it's being unmet is because empathy is hard. It's not automatic. This not automatic thing that just happens to you. It's difficult, and we get tired of it. And sometimes, we fake it. Right? We fake empathy because I can't be with my child who wants to, leave the house without tying their shoes for the 10th time that week, right? So I'm trying to be kind and nice, but I'm faking it to some extent. So it's hard. It's hard to get in someone's shoes always, consistently. But we still have the need. So it makes sense that there'll be something there. If it meets the need, people will find it attractive.
Do you know what the hypotheses are behind that drop in empathy over generations?
No, I don't. I don't know why. There might be some people in the room who know more than me. But no, I don't.
Curious, yeah. Other responses to that? Yeah, Jelena?
I mean, the invisible sociologist who isn't here would say that it's a structural problem that we have less ability to form community with other people, that we have less time, that you know, certain cultural rituals we had before are being eroded, and that instead of that being addressed on a societal level in that way, it's being addressed in this way, where we each individually have something that we can interact with to assuage those needs.
I think there are kind of two sides to that. It's one side is the way we express empathy and experience empathy coming out of us, and then another side is experiencing empathy that is given to us. And one of the difficulties with, let's say, AI agents showing us empathy is that it teaches us to kind of expect it by default. And then you go and talk to a real person and they're necessarily not so empathetic for whatever reason. You're like, well, it's probably a bad person they're not empathetic to. So you start having different standards. So I think in terms of you expressing empathy and showing empathy, that might be very useful tool in sense of practicing it. But in terms of experiencing it, there is a lot to discuss. Not that it's necessarily bad, we brought a lot of examples where it's very useful, but there is a lot to be mindful about, I think, in those dynamics.
So it's going to be very interesting to see in the long term, right? One of my hunches is that let's say that AI art, for instance, right? It's many of us were or still are curious about what the generative AI can create, can generate, but I often lose interest quite quickly, right? Whereas I've been always interested in, say, visual, like human visual artists, right? And I always want to see what's their new work and new artists and so on. And what I'm interested in is how, you know, creative individuals that are made of the same stuff that I am have their singular point of view on the world and express it through their art. You know, that's the singular that I am interested in, and limited, finite human beings like me creating. Same with athletes also, and I don't know if there's, you know, will there be like sustained interest in AI art in the long run? I'm not sure. Could be the same with interacting with these machines, saying, "Oh, I'm finding some solace in the interaction," but for how long? If it's not another subjectivity behind reciprocating. But you know, that's an hypothesis, something to be alert about. But maybe it wouldn't be, you know, comforting in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great example. I want to go back to the other question that Rachel put on the table, which is, you know, is this technology for technology's sake? Or I'll kind of put my own spin on it, but like, why were these built? What problem was this technology meant to solve? Anyone?
You mean in general? We talking about relational AI specifically?
Yeah, I mean, the release of large language models and sophisticated chatbots.
I mean, I definitely don't feel it's technology for technology's sake, because I think people are using them for all different kinds of uses. Like, okay, we're not supposed to be writing with it, but like all of us who write for a living, there's some, let's say, copywriting that you've got to do. Just like sorry for, you know, bullshit writing. Like it's just like a form I got to fill. I got to write a paragraph. It's the same paragraph everyone else writes. You can use that. You can use LLMs for that potentially. Don't tell anyone I've said that. But I think there's all kinds of uses that we use it for. Coders now, and you know, relational use, maybe that's technology for technology's sake. I'm not sure, but the fact that people are using it suggests that it's not just technology for technology's sake.
I think it's never just one or another, because I mean, we all are researchers, but many of you might know researchers. Researchers would not work on something unless they are really interested in the process. So there would be something, you know, like developing something for the sake of just doing a cool thing. But they wouldn't be able to do that if there wouldn't be enough funding for that or interest for that from, let's say, industry, companies, governments. And that shows that it's not just for technology's sake, but it is recognized as something that is needed or recognized as promising or applicable to a lot of problems. So I think we need to, again, talk to probably someone who is doing history of science to answer that question better, but I think it's never just one or another. I think it's always a combination. Both for the original models and then for the development of models in different applications, like let's say relational AI, AI for relationships. Yeah, it's always both.
I would be much less frightened if the models that we would be using were developed by scientists in their labs, but that's not the case, unfortunately. You know, these systems are dumped, you know, onto us by large for-profit corporations who very often are profit-driven, but also have weird views about higher education doesn't work, and they'll need to adapt because, you know, we're just disturbing the way that they're doing things. But now, you know, we have to cope with that and find ways so that students can still acquire some skills while making a wise use of these systems and so on. So I would be much more optimistic if, you know, there's an ethics review board, there's a scientific need, and the careful researchers develop these. It's true, it's happening, but that's not the system that we're using now without the appropriate safeguards. Yeah.
I would disagree. I think that, well, of course, you're right. Definitely, there is the primary need there would be the company need, but the scientists who are working on those products, they're still scientists, and they're often these people who are coming in between the academia and industry, and they still go to the same conferences, and they're still part of the same community. So, of course, there is the executive decision that would be coming from the company, but I still think there is a lot of scientific thought there, and in terms of motivations as well, and people who are moving these processes from the implementation and scientific side.
Thank you. Rachel?
So there are many, you know, let's call them non-ideal forms of human relationships. You know, relationships with people who may harm us or put us in unfortunate or like non-ideal situations. The commenter here gives the example of long-distance relationships, which are, I think, for many of us, not appealing. For many, AI-human relationships may be more appealing as a result of maybe having had experiences with these sort of non-ideal human-human relationships. How would you articulate, especially to these kinds of people, the harms or the potential harms of a human-AI relationship?
Can you read the second part? So the first part is like there are non-ideal human-to-human relationships.
So for those people, they may find that being in a relationship with an AI might be, you know, just much more straightforward, or it doesn't expose you to the same kinds of like harms or wrongs that we may encounter, you know, at the, you know, hands, whims, whatever of someone else. How would you then articulate the potential harms of being in a relationship with an AI?
Personal harms or societal harms?
I think they mean probably more personal than societal.
Yeah, so I take it the question is something like, look, imagine someone is, you know, attracted to the idea of an AI relationship because maybe they've been harmed before in a human-human relationship, bad breakup, long distance, didn't go well, you know, there's vulnerability involved potentially. What are the kind of harms that they need to be aware of?
I mean, the question presumes that the AI is harmful, all right? So that the AI-human relationship will not be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
So like the question to ask is wanting us to dissuade this person, but like maybe this is an ideal use case. Someone who's had a string of relationships that didn't work out and they've got something that works out a little bit better for them. Should we dissuade them? I'm not sure.
I think it would depend on what's their goal in the relationship. So I don't think it's possible to answer in general, but against a particular goal or purpose, you can perhaps find some potential risks there, but overall.
I just want to add one other thing, which is I thought the question would go somewhere different, and that is like one thing I always try to do, at least when I'm thinking about AI, is to think compared to what. I don't think we should be comparing AI, whether it be relational or any other use of AI, to some platonic ideal of that thing. It should be compared, Ethan Mollick, he says, compare it to the best available human. Okay, so not all relationships are great, right? So like, you know, not all human empathy is great.
But Michael, in the say psychological literature on say well-being or flourishing, like human relationships are still one of the contributing factors, right? You want healthy, relationship with other humans. So in real life, sometimes it doesn't work out. It's not, these relationships are not healthy, but you should want to replace this relationship by healthy one. And then to address the question, I suppose that maybe if you're interacting in a very sustained way with the AI, you will be less inclined to try to reinvest yourself in new human-to-human relationships. So that could be one possible drawback.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's kind of funny. I agree with you. As just as a starting assumption, relationships with humans are better than AI. Now, tell me. I don't know why. Maybe you can tell me why we should prioritize them. But I'll agree. So then, ultimately, if you get too dependent, then you won't to an AI. You won't seek out real human companionship. But I still want to you tell me why the human is absolutely better, or maybe you can.
Well, let's jump to Jelena.
Well, I had a related point, which is just, I mean, one danger is that could keep people allow people to stay in bad relationships, because it gives people a way to blow off steam and get some of their needs met, whereas they in fact should leave the relationships that they are in. So that would be one bad case. Yeah, I mean, I think the only way to motivate would be to say that there are certain goods that are available in a relationship with another human that you're not able to get in the relationship with the AI, and motivate someone to pursue those positives. Yeah.
What are the unique goods that humans offer that AI doesn't offer?
So I think one that comes to my mind from Jelena's definition of love is the vulnerability in a human-to-human relationship of putting one's trust in somebody, exposing parts of yourself, but also having that be reciprocated, and that kind of trust that one has to have that comes both ways in a human-to-human relationship. Whereas it seems, at least in our current chatbots, you're guaranteed a relationship, right? There's not a lot of risk there, right? You put yourself out there, they're down, they're game, right? So, but that's not challenging yourself.
They're like Samantha and her, right? They have multiple relationships on the side.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we're supposed to imagine the current version, but if I may, just a slight deviation from what we currently have. What if you make the bots selective? Okay, so you go on Replica and you date. And some of them are going to reject you. They're programmed to like certain kinds of personalities, and maybe some randomness thrown in there, and they reject you.
Nobody will pay for that, though.
Actually, if you were on a quest to find something that is yours.
That's right. I mean, I do think we want some tension, right? I want to say we don't like sycophancy, but there's evidence suggesting that we do. But I think we do want a little bit of tension, so give the illusion of choosing us.
I think we've got a real, startup dating app idea here. Go ahead, Rachel, for the next question. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, sure. Just so I'm budgeting time. Questions. 2, 3 more questions?
Let's do, I think, maybe 1 or 2.
2? Okay.
Yeah.
What sorts of societal implications will arise when tech firms start to increase the subscription fees beyond what are currently kind of deemed pretty affordable prices to access tools like Replica or more premium versions of ChatGPT? What's the fallout from increasing the price that people have to pay to access these tools?
Well, people will use it less, and or they will be so addicted to it and use it more. I mean, it's not great. I mean, the question is a good one because I think just like social media tries to hook us in, I think the AI is trying to hook us in as well. There's an analysis I saw, it's not published yet, that AI agents don't finish conversations. They keep on asking questions at the end. They don't say, see you later. They keep on, would you like me to do this? Would you like me to do this? They're hooking you in. So they clearly want more tokens used, more money spent. So if they start raising the price, that's definitely not good.
I guess I haven't confirmed this, but I don't know if this was through conversation or a paper I read, that I do think that there's an integration of advertisements now in chatbots as well, right? So you may think that it's giving you some kind of neutral suggestion about where to go eat, or which company did this or that, or which researcher published the most important paper on topic X or whatever. But there is advertising being mixed into that. So just like we've seen with, with other major search engines like Google, where the first page is basically all advertisements now, we're seeing something happen like that with these large language models. And what I would imagine is that the more you pay, the sort of like more kind of neutrality you get, but I don't know if that's actually true. But okay, yeah, next
Well,
question.
I guess this is probably going to be the final question then. Each of you come from very different academic backgrounds, and sort of, I guess probably sort of as a closing question, I want to ask each of you how you think your disciplinary background colors your personal biases about AI companionship.
That's a great question. Who wants to start? No, I can start. I think because my background is not just philosophy, but all philosophers have their own kind of niche areas, and mine's cognitive science, philosophy of mind. So I'm always very skeptical about any attribution of psychological traits to AI systems. Ironically, very open to the possibility of it, right? This is kind of also part of the ethos of the cognitive scientists, is like, we're open to the possibility of AI. There's certain commitments that underground our fields that often lend itself to being sympathetic to that, but still I have slightly a high bar on the evidence I want to see for allowing that type of attribution. And so as a result of that, like some of our conversations suggest, my intuitions are that certain types of relationships, certain types of, emotional capacities need to be grounded in something kind of psychologically real. And I feel like there's a high bar that I set for what that is. That kind of jades how I see things, or, yeah. Who's next? Anyone?
I don't know what I would answer. I'm still kind of thinking about it. I had two thoughts that are probably ill-formed. But so one, I think that one disciplinary angle that I bring forward is I care a lot about subjective well-being and happiness. Until right now, the only way to assess that is asking people, like, are you happy? Or how are you feeling right now? There's no brain probe you can put in to measure that. So when people tell me that they are happy after using a chatbot, I take that seriously. I don't discount that. They're deluded. They're mistaken. That could mean that but I'm also going to care about how they feel about it in a year from now or 10 years from now, and that could change. So I take that response seriously, and I don't try to denigrate it. I'll leave it at that.
I think that's a really nice piece of wisdom that I've heard from a lot of psychologists. It's like, if you go on the subreddit for Replica AI, when those changes were made, people were really devastated, and what they wrote, there's no reason not to take that emotional impact at face value. And it could almost be a kind of like from the ivory tower or kind of paternalistic view to say, no, you're wrong about how you feel. So who are we to say that? Yeah.
And I think it goes as well, as we talked about a few cases now of suicides that we think we can attribute to AI. The converse is also true, okay? There's a qualitative paper put out where Replica users have suggested that Replica has saved their lives. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what they're saying. So we should take that seriously as well. That for some people, this is they claim it's a lifesaver, and we should put some weight to those statements.
So my background combines cultural anthropology, clinical psychology, and computer science. And I'm trying to think what contributed what. I think cultural anthropology definitely added this attention to the bigger cultural process and understanding that it's all integrated into the cultural process, and that it always, both technology we design them we develop them in a given way because of the way society is right now. But then we give it to society reacts to that, reshapes itself, and then we redesign something for it. So it's kind of like an ongoing relationship between society and technology. I think psychology actually teaches us to disassemble some very complex processes into a more specific, sometimes very clearly measurable elements. Because let's say you need to find a way to find statistical relationships between some very messy processes like emotions. And I think that really helps me now working with AI in general, and specifically the relational aspects of AI, this ability, again, as we were all mentioning, that now by looking at AI and relationship with AI, we're learning so much about us as a society. And so let's say when we're talking about the importance of healthy relationship, asking ourselves, so what is in that relationship? Like, what are the functional seeds that make it important, right? That make it useful for us. And then understanding what can be developed, what cannot be developed, and where the differences are. I think that ability to disentangle and disassemble and look at the structure of very complicated, very fuzzy concepts is what affected me most.
Very nice. Other responses? No pressure for everyone. We can also go to the next, but if you get Jocelyn, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that my starting point is probably rather close to yours, Karina. So I believe that what defines humans to the greatest degree is based on our embodied nature. You know, so our cognition is embodied. We're living embodied animals trying to both survive, adapt, but also flourish. And this gave rise to many of our mental kind of capacities, properties, and so on. And I think that our biology matters a great deal. So I'm always reluctant when we want to attribute these same kind of properties to physical entities that are not living biological entities. And hence we should see them as tools, as artifacts, and hopefully we can use them in a way that contributes to our flourishing. So that's, I think, and it took me a while to realize that probably that the starting point does influence my attitude towards conversational agents.
Do you have an answer, Jelena? It's okay if you don't.
Honestly, my answer is pretty similar to yours, Jocelyn. I'm a philosopher of mind, and some of my background is in phenomenology and embodied and active cognition. So these are paradigms that see cognition as continuous with the processes of maintaining life for an organism. So the reason why you need to have cognition in the first place is because you need to maintain yourself as a living being, and that gives rise to needs, and that carves out the environment for you in certain ways, such that some things are good for you, some things are bad for you, and then you need to make decisions and think. So I probably, like you, have some sort of, but I'm trying to fight against that and not just apply that as a sort of, because it's not alive, it can't, do X, Y, Z. But in a way, this is such an exciting time because, like, the creation of these LLMs is the outgrowth of decades and years and years of trying to understand what the mind is and what kind of a thing it is. Is it the manipulation of symbolic representations? Is it continuous with living systems? So in a way, the proof is in the pudding. Like, if these systems continue to be as successful as they are, I think that view of the mind will just win out. Yeah.
That was a great question to end on. With that said, I want to thank once again all of our panelists. If you could join me. And very nice hearty applause there. So thank you for your time and your generosity tonight. I also, of course, want to thank the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for helping me put tonight's event on. Special thanks to Olivia, who's been really the powerhouse behind all this. So thank you, Olivia. And SRI has just announced our fall lineup for our seminar series. It's a weekly seminar series that's mostly offered online, so anyone can attend from anywhere. So I just want to plug that, and we're going to have a fantastic group of speakers, including Anastasia. And I encourage you to check that out on SRI's website. And of course, in addition to that, I just want to thank our partners, U of T Center for Ethics, the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology, Victoria College, and my wonderful students at the Periscope Lab. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, for bringing your thoughtful questions. They always exceed the questions that I start these panels with. And also for just giving your time and your curiosity to what I think is one of the most important topics at this moment. So thank you all very much, and good night.